Welcome back, and let us continue where we ended. So I'm assuming that you've already done filling in the empty spaces on this beautiful diagram. We are just going to jump into the solution now. Right, so the first one that you had to put in there was radiant energy. Remember, I did say that it's a type of energy, so you had to put in radiant energy. And then that radiant energy is absorbed by the chlorophyll. Remember that. So your next one was chlorophyll. And then the radiant energy that is absorbed by the chlorophyll puts together two things. Remember, it puts together the carbon dioxide and the water. So these are the two things that undergo a chemical reaction. And then photosynthesis happens. So when photosynthesis happens, we have two byproducts. These two byproducts are namely the glucose and the oxygen. These are the byproducts of photosynthesis. And if you completed this correctly, the way that I have just done it with you, congratulations, smart learner. Let us move on to our application questions. So these are real life questions, or questions that apply to real life. So the first question here says, if photosynthesis is the beginning of energy transfer between living organisms, then what do you think would happen if plants suddenly stopped undergoing photosynthesis? Remember, photosynthesis is the process where plants make their own food. The very same plants are what the animals, the human beings, are eating. So now if they stop making their own food, obviously they are going to stop growing. So what happens now? Let us see what happens. So the first thing that is going to happen is that herbivores, these are animals that eat plants. So these animals would not have food, and they could potentially die, because if you have no food, no nutrition. No nutrition, no energy. Remember, this lesson is about the transfer of energy. No energy, you will be in one place for a very long time and possibly die. Right, so our herbivores are going to die. Then if our herbivores die, guess what happens? Carnivores. Carnivores are animals that eat meat. So they don't eat plants, they eat meat. They get their energy from eating meat. So now, these carnivores could also die. Why are they dying? Because their source of food is dead. If the herbivores are dead, then the carnivores have no food, have no animals to eat. Then they could also die. And then this could cause the ecosystem to collapse, because living organisms would not have food to survive. So that is answering our question here, that what would happen if photosynthesis would stop happening in plants? Let us move on to the next one. Our next challenge question here says, in our lesson, you have learned that green plants produce glucose, and that is stored as starch during photosynthesis. Therefore, explain the importance of photosynthesis in humans. Now, we are not talking about animals in general. We are just talking about human beings. What would happen if, or what is the importance of photosynthesis in human beings? Let us now look at it. Firstly, all of the living organisms, including humans, need energy for their bodies to perform tasks. That one is a given. We spoke about it. And remember, the source of energy is the sun. So we all need this energy. So photosynthesis is the vehicle. When we say vehicle, we mean photosynthesis is what moves the energy. So it's the vehicle that moves the energy from the sun to the humans. So energy is moved from the sun to humans through the process of photosynthesis. Now, how is that done? It is done by converting the light energy into glucose, which is stored as starch in animals. So that is what happens. So basically, that is the importance of photosynthesis in humans, is that we all need energy. And then how do we get that energy? through photosynthesis, because photosynthesis changes the radiant energy into glucose, and we as human beings obviously need this glucose. So let us look at the third point. Actually, it further elaborates that. Humans then eat the plants. So we eat the plants and receive the starch that is stored in the plant, which then gives us human beings the energy for our bodies to perform tasks. What type of tasks, you may ask? Like growing physically. You growing, your body needs energy for the growth. Breathing, you need energy to breathe. Running, you need energy to run. Creating and uploading videos on TikTok. If you remember the first time I saw you, I said you would not be able to go on TikTok if it wasn't for photosynthesis. So now here it comes. Right. Just to wrap up our lesson, so this is our concept map. We looked at the need for energy and we defined photosynthesis. We then spoke about the requirements of photosynthesis, which was sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. We then looked at the chloroplast and the chlorophyll and their function. We then moved on to photosynthesis products, and then we did the photosynthesis chemical equation. And then lastly, we spoke about the biological importance of photosynthesis on living organisms. We are also introduced to new terms. We defined photosynthesis. We spoke about what producers are. We spoke about what radiant energy is. We spoke about the chemical reaction. We also defined interdependence. We defined glucose. And lastly, we defined chlorophyll. So before we wrap this lesson up, I just want to bring your attention to a few mistakes that we normally make when we are dealing with photosynthesis. So we are going to look at the common errors for this lesson. You should try not to confuse the role of starch and glucose during photosynthesis. If you remember, we said that plants make glucose and use the glucose for its own processes, while the starch is stored in the plant and is used by other organisms that are going to consume the plant. Also, do not confuse oxygen and carbon dioxide in terms of which one is the requirement and which one is the product. If you remember, photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide in order for it to happen, and then it takes out oxygen as a product. And lastly, do not confuse chloroplast and chlorophyll. Chloroplast is a structure that contains chlorophyll, which is a pigment that is responsible for absorbing light energy, for absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Coming to our challenge question. So this is a question that you need to go home and try and answer on your own. If photosynthesis is the beginning of energy transfer between living organisms and it uses sunlight to make food for plants, then how do plants in the water make their own food? So this is a nice picture of plants in the water. Now you need to tell me how these plants make their own food. That is all for today. I hope you had a great lesson just like I did. Have a nice day and I'll see you next time.